Around the late 1990s, early 2000s, the strobe traffic advisor could be powered by a variety of supplies. It was usually the ISP series 188, but the UPS 690 or SPS 690 could power a variety of strobe traffic advisors, the 64 series being the largest. The switching matrix for this using the 690 was pretty similar, but it ended up with the same bad alternating pattern for warning, meaning you didn't flash all the light heads. So I always wanted to flash all the light heads alternating against each other with a traffic advisor. And I also always wanted to use my 690 as a traffic advisor. So this 6-head one was perfect. But how to do that? So I came up with a different matrix to get that alternating flash in warning mode. Essentially, it involves the fact that the switching works on 3 power supply wires for a pattern, gray, white, and brown. Hooking up all 3 puts you in traffic advisor mode, where the other 3 wires select the direction of the arrow. Disconnecting one puts you back in regular flash mode. So my plan was, if I could hook the 2 pattern wires up and then make the final pattern wire that puts it in the power supply into arrow mode contingent, I could take it out of arrow mode, drop it back into the flash pattern that the remaining 2 wires provide, which is action flash, which is exactly what I wanted. And then I started thinking, I have this 6-head strobe with 2 halogen 64s on the end. I could actually use this to do something else that I've been wanting to do for a while, which is put a steady burn pilot light on the end of a strobe traffic advisor. So essentially, the direction that the arrow strobes towards, there's a steady burn halogen lamp illuminated. And I decided to do that by getting a code 3710, running some diodes so that you weren't backfeeding, and using those trigger wires that are still arrow trigger wires when it's in arrow mode, and then when it gets flopped out of arrow mode by removing the power to the single pattern wire, that will now also trigger the flasher to flash versus the steady burn at the end of the arrow. So with a relay, a flasher, and 4 diodes, I was pretty confident I could make a device where there would be a steady burn pilot light in the direction that the arrow flashed, and that those lamps could then become flashers themselves, and that the strobe traffic advisor and power supply could drop into a real pattern. So this is pretty much the rig I came up with. You have 3 power wires, or 3 switching wires rather, green, blue, and yellow. Green and blue are your directions. Together they're center out. And the yellow wire then is the warning pattern, which is 3 against 3 instead of 2 against 2. And it also then flashes the end lamps instead of using them as pilot lamps. I really like the idea of a pilot lamp at the end of a strobe traffic advisor. I think one of the things that they suffered from, maybe not so much Tomar, but especially Whelen's, was not enough dwell time. So I think the halogen pilot light at the end, or the ends in this case, when you're doing center out mode, is a concept that could have helped quite a bit, and I'd always wanted to try to do that. But again, I also had always hated the warning flash pattern of those strobe traffic advisors. So here it is dropping into warning mode. So you're flashing your pilot lamps, and you're having an alternating 3 against 3 action flash, which is comet flash mixed with single flash strobe pattern. So it really goes to a maximum warning bar, and then the other option is a strobe traffic advisor with a pilot lamp on the end. So I was able to achieve both of those goals with just the UPS 690 factory, I guess I should also say one single automotive relay, and a code 3 710, and the 4 diodes, and some wasted wire and various other wasted wiring supplies. It's not incredibly pretty at this point, but it is on a mount board that can go with the bar. And theoretically, if it were ever to be used, it could be mounted nearby. I could also consolidate this quite a bit. There's a lot of unused space, and some of that wire is a little redundant. I was still kind of playing with the idea of how to make some of the functions work, so I left myself a lot of slack in the wire. I do think it came out pretty well. I do still like the idea of the halogen pilot lamp at the end of the strobe traffic advisor. And I don't think I care what color they are. I like red because it's like the universal stop color, but I think amber would be just as good. I just don't happen to have two good condition amber halogen lenses, because the strobe lenses and the halogen lenses were different at this time. These were still called 64 series, but it was a short period where they were the linear strobes, but the 64 series, not 6E, not 600. It kind of had a rounded lens to them like the old 64, but they were clear optic with linear relampable bulbs. I think the warning pattern is much more effective doing 3 against 3. There's a lot of slow motion footage here to look at. I like the fact that the 3 against 3 action flash is coupled with the double flash alternating, then simultaneous pulse code 3 flasher. I think that's a good combination. I think that would be a realistic sort of warning setup for a traffic advisor to drop into, whereas previously the 4 against 4 heads, not so much. And then just leaving those end lights as flashers, which is, I believe, based on how the bar was set up, what they were intended to be, to me, I think is distracting when it's in arrow mode. I don't think emergency vehicle operators use their arrows a lot or correctly, and I am positive that the public doesn't understand them. So throwing flashers at the end of them, I think, makes that even worse, especially on a strobe version that might have dwell time problems to begin with. So I think a far better use of the end lamps when it's in arrow mode is the pilot lamp. When you're in warning mode like this, I think the flasher is absolutely fine, and as on a Whelen flasher, it would have just been alternating, which is also fine. I'm sure there'll be some comments about how much better the Tomar traffic advisor strobe bars were, and I agree. Neo power supplies were probably superior in that respect. As far as an arrow is concerned, I think the dwell time was better, and it actually looked more like an arrow. Whelen didn't offer strobe traffic advisor in a lot of power supplies. They did in a few more than you would think, but not a lot. And when you got it, you generally got one type of strobe flash. There wasn't a whole lot of customization to be done. Maybe through B-Link or SmartLink or some of the serial products, you could have controlled your traffic advisor or strobe flash, but just powering it from a power supply, you didn't get a lot of options, and the dwell time wasn't great. If I do come across another decent set of amber for the ends of this, I think I might go with that as a pilot lamp, only from a standpoint of keep the whole bar the same color, and it will be closer to an actual cruise light. I'm kind of torn on the subject. I can always switch them back and forth. It's a 4-screw lens mount. You don't have to remove the lens from the housing, or the light from the housing rather, to get to the lens. This does mark an interesting transitional period for the strobe products, where the housings, they had several different types. This type actually had tabs on it to slide into this modular system. And the lenses, like I said, were still kind of rounded rather than being sharp edged, which was kind of the beginning of the 6E series or the 600 series. So some of the last of the 6.4 series and some of the first of the linear, 95 to 96, Whelen started offering their 900, but mostly their 97 series actually at the time, and their 64 series, mostly their 64 series, in linear options. If you wanted, the 7.3 series stayed twist lock a little bit longer, but eventually also went linear, and then you had that brief 7E period before the 700 series where everything was linear. But this is actual 6.4 series strobes, slide-in style, and 6.4 series halogen slide-in style in the light block style traffic advisor housing. This is also a shorter version than was often advertised, and the 2-end halogen lamps is also not generally extremely common. I did a lot of slow motion footage of this. I think trying to get a handle on whether or not I think the strobe traffic advisor suffers from lack of lightheads at once, flash pattern, dwell time, overall number of lightheads, and whether or not I think the pilot light that I added actually made a difference. So there's a lot of slow motion footage. There's also, at the end, there's some slow motion footage with the pilot lamps disabled. So you can compare that if you want, and see if you think it makes any difference. I think for a real comparison, we would have to put this, a good 100 yards away and see if that made a difference at all. The other thing I was considering was perhaps making the pilot lamps flash. But again, if it doesn't flash in sequence with the strobe, I don't know how effective it would be directionally. So as more of a cruise light, pilot light, my theory is that it would make it more noticeable. I will take this outside and do a distance test at some point and record those results. And I'll record them in comparison to no pilot light. So if you don't think the comparison in this video with the slow motion is good enough, that will be to come. A little bit more detail on how this was actually set up. It's really just an analog of the fact that the way these power supplies worked, where you got 3 pattern wires and 3 switching wires. When you hooked up all 3 pattern wires at once, it went into traffic advisor mode, and all 3 control wires became arrow control wires. Like I said, 1 for each direction, combine the 2 for center out, and then 1 for a warning pattern that I didn't like. The way that I got around using that warning pattern was making the relay setup such that when you selected the wire for the warning pattern, it disconnected one of the pattern wires, which then meant that it dropped out of traffic advisor mode and into regular strobe mode. And I set the dip switch so that it was progressive switching, meaning that wire, that yellow in this case, that happens to activate the warning function of the traffic advisor, also activates all 6 strobes. So I was able to, by removing power to one pattern wire, when power was applied to one switching wire, turn on all the strobes, take the supply out of traffic advisor mode, and get the pattern I wanted simply by removing power to the single one of 3 pattern wires. It was the gray wire. They're brown, white, and gray. The gray being removed from the set of 3 drops it into action flash. And if you're in progressive switching, then the yellow wire, which would do the warning within the arrow patterns, also does all lightheads within the regular setup. So it's very convenient. You could switch between that without the relay. You could do that just by switching. You could set up a switch box so that you could do that. I think the more complex part was probably getting the end lamps to do what I wanted. Flash during warning mode and steady burn a single lamp during arrow mode in the same direction. Not incredibly complex, but it did require some diodes to prevent backfeed and a little bit of experimentation with what the Code 3 flasher would tolerate. So like I said, here's some footage of it without those pilot lamps. I think it's fine. I like it better with, but again, this is up close, so it's kind of hard to say. Overall, I enjoyed the project. I'm happy to say that it was actually fun. I like messing with the late 90s strobes, especially using them to their fullest potential. And I think by messing with the pattern wire and the control wire, I was able to do that. So if you enjoy this sort of content, these custom builds, make a comment, like the video, share the video, and elightbars.org has an ongoing discussion about this project and other similar ones that other members have made. Thanks.